Hey guys, and welcome back to the FFP. Today we're going to be going over our top 10 dynasty quarterbacks. I'm excited to start getting to some rankings videos. I feel like once we hit the rankings video season starts to get a lot closer, get a lot more excited. I'm excited in particular to start with dynasty because I don't know what it is. I just prefer dynasty leagues. I think it's kind of fun to, well, build my own dynasty. I love watching what the Patriots have done over the last 15 years and try to repeat that. Although hopefully I won't be doing what they've done this last offseason and lost most of their talent. But anyways, that's what we're going to be doing. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to go back and forth and just talk about which guys are the best options to keep over the next few years. And remember, this is a dynasty video, so we're not just looking at 2020. We'll be looking at probably the next 3 or 4 years and these guys' value projecting forward. So just keep that in mind. But without any further ado, guys, let's just get right into it. All right, guys. So at number one, we absolutely have to put Pat Mahomes here. Me and Rob, we agreed on this. For us, there was really no discussion about it. He has been the top fantasy quarterback. And really, in my mind, I personally think he's the top quarterback in the NFL just in general. The production has been there, and I don't think there's any arguing that. Yes, there might be some people who might put Lamar or whoever at number one, but we can all agree that he is a truly great quarterback and honestly looks like he's already on his way to finishing in the Hall of Fame. But of course, we'll see how his continue goes on. He's only been in the league for 3 years, and that's what's so impressive about what he's done. He's only been in the league for 3 years, and he's been starting for 2 years. But what's particularly phenomenal about that is in those 2 years starting, he's already totaled over 10,000 yards and 80 touchdowns. That's 76 passing touchdowns and 4 rushing touchdowns, and that's one of the things I love about him. I think I really like quarterbacks like Steve Young and Pat Mahomes, guys who've got mobility. They've got pocket presence. They can run when they need to, but they keep their eyes downfield and they throw the ball as often as they can. There's always that. It's fun to watch a Cam Newton or a Lamar Jackson, but it always makes me nervous what hit's going to take them out or whether or not their coaches are going to kind of work them away from moving that. But Pat Mahomes, he's got this great balance. He's got great weapons. Andy Reid has really put together an awesome cast around him with Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. And then they go out and draft Clyde Helaire-Edwards, who is really getting some hype recently. And I'm kind of starting to buy the hype that he was the right choice as the #1 running back off the board in this year's draft. And he's going to add a lot to help kind of boost that backfield and their ability to work in the passing game and do some things. So for me, over the next few years, I absolutely love him. And just the weapons there, it's hard to argue with. That's why, for me, I put him at #1. What's interesting, though, is that he's got this great year where he has 52 touchdown passes, and he followed us up last year, and everybody's, wow, Pat Mahomes is kind of disappointed, kind of an off year. Everybody's kind of down on him, but he had 27 touchdown passes in just 13 full games. Can't really knock him for that. He was easily going to go over 30 touchdown passes. And so I guess he's one of those guys last year where people were down on him a little bit, but I think he just got kind of overhyped. I don't expect him to throw over 50 touchdowns every year. That's just stupid. It really is. But again, the fact of the matter is he's in a perfect situation, and there's really no concerns, right? We don't have anything to say, hey, this is a problem with him. So for me, looking over the next 3 years coming forward, I have to put him at #1. And I think Rob agrees with me, but let me know if you guys have any reasons why maybe you wouldn't want to put him here. But for me, it's pretty cut and clear that he's got to be the top guy.
Yeah, for me, this is a no-brainer, honestly. We actually did a video last year where we talked about Pat Mahomes' regression. Now, we went on to say that he's going to have a good year. We predicted he would get about 30 touchdown passes, but there is a statistical ceiling that players hit, right? Like, this is not Xbox. You're not going to continue to put up those numbers all the time. So we did predict it, but this is a no-brainer. He's the #1 guy, and I want to say this. We'll get to it when we talk about Lamar Jackson shortly, but please do not consider Lamar Jackson over Pat Mahomes. That would be a big mistake. Pat Mahomes is clearly the #1 guy out there, but we'll get into that later. So. But I was a little envious because to me that's such a good, easy guy to go with. Like nobody's gonna hate your pick of Pat Mahomes #1. Now what we did, just for you guys out there need to know, was he ranked his top 10, I ranked my top 10, and we averaged it out to come with the list that we have today.
That was the thing. They were pretty similar across the board, although I wasn't at all surprised to see Pat Mahomes #1. The interesting stat that I've been looking into a lot recently is the percentage of times a player finishes at the as a starter in their position. So for quarterbacks, I was curious, Pat Mahomes, how frequently does he finish as a top 12 QB? Because that's ultimately what matters. How often is he a starter for you when you draft him? That's what we want to address. Well, he led all quarterbacks over the last 2 years. 22 times he has finished in the top 12. That's 73% starting percentage. And in fact, 47% of the time, essentially half of the time, he's a top 5 QB. So that is consistent dominance. And from a position where there's only 3 or 4 guys in the NFL who are averaging over 50%. So that is really impressive to look at. But we'll talk about that a little bit more with some other players in this video. Rob, let's get to your first guy at #2.
Yeah. So I like this guy for a lot of reasons. One, I just like him as a player. He seems like a decent human being. Don't know him, but I love Russell Wilson. Okay, now we got him on our Dynasty video, but he's 31 years old, and he's not as young as, let's say, Pat Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. If he was a running back, he would be considered old, unless of course he's Frank Gore, right? Like
Unless
I
he's
thought it
Frank
was, I
Gore.
did it. Frank Gore apparently he's going to play one more year. I think he's going to be what 37, 38. I don't know what he's going to be there, but. Besides kickers, quarterbacks had what I'd say they age the best among football players. Their length of career is longer, but not only that, but the quality of the amount of years that they play quality football is just a lot larger out there. And then when we look at age 31, we'll break it down here shortly, but he could easily still have his best years ahead of him. He could easily go out and play for another 8 to 10 years without a problem. I don't think that's a stretch at all. And so, yeah, he is 31, but another 8 to 10 years definitely puts him as a guy you need to consider for dynasty quarterbacks out there. Consider this, Peyton Manning set the NFL record with 55 touchdown passes when he was 37 years old. Like, that's crazy. But it's not just him. Brett Favre had his best season statistically, not even close, really, if you're being honest. Now, like, I always think about him, and I think about Brett Favre wearing a Packer jersey, right? But his best single season was with the Vikings at age 40. Or here's another one, and I know that you've always been big on Drew Brees for many, many years. Drew Brees, if you start at the age of 37 for him, he's had 4 consecutive years with a completion percentage over 70. He set the all-time record, and then he broke his own record twice after that. He's had 5 consecutive years with a quarterback rating over 100, with a career best quarterback rating last year at the age of 40 at 116. So you look at the ages there. Once again, 8 to 10 good years are easily ahead for Russell Wilson. And here's the other reason why I don't have a problem having him here at age 31, or even a couple guys that he may be a little older. We'll cover that later on. Is that we don't put high value on keeping a quarterback in dynasty leagues. Now, we've done some videos, broke down the metrics and why we say that. We're not saying you shouldn't have good quarterbacks. In fact, you can't win a league if you're really deficient in one position. But we don't put a high value on keeping dynasty quarterbacks unless you're in a league that has position requirements. So he might not be as young as some other players out there, but simply put, here's what I would say. Sometimes we look so far ahead. We look, 8 to 10 years ahead, but don't forget about the here and now, the next 3 to 4 years. Okay, don't be worried about 2026 when for the next 4 or 5 years or 3, 4 years you could have a really good player. Now, what do the numbers say about his play? Okay, well, his numbers, he's gotten better the longer he's been in the league. 4 out of the last 5 seasons, he had over 30 touchdown passes. 5 times in his career, he's had a quarterback rating over 100 for the season. His career quarterback rating is 101.2. That's second all time to Aaron Rodgers. And then an added bonus that he has, he's a guy that came in the league, he ran a lot, but now I think more of those legs goes back to what you said. He's a guy that uses legs not necessarily to run. He can run, but he's primarily a pocket passer. But he's definitely athletic and he buys time. And he does have 19 career rushing touchdowns. Now here's another one that matters. If I look at a quarterback's value, he's got to have a good surrounding cast. If he doesn't have good weapons like you talked about there, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. Well, here's who he's got. He's got DK Metcalf, who is a young stud. He's going to be a perennial All-Pro. And their chemistry got stronger and stronger as the year went on. And you look at Tyler Lockett, had 1,000 yards last year, and yet he was dealing with some injuries that kind of hindered him. But he's a great compliment to Metcalf. Looks like you have something to say about Metcalf there.
No, I completely agree. Metcalf is one of the best young wide receivers, and you get a perfect balance of, you know what, you hate to have 6 slot receivers and 6 wide receivers on a team. You need a balance, and that's a perfect balance. You've got this every play, move the chains, DK Metcalf. But I like Lockett outside. He's the big playmaker. He's going to stretch the field, and it keeps defenses honest. It's kind of a perfect chemistry there. It really is.
Yeah, it really is. And this offseason they went out and they added Philip Dorsett. Now, I'd say Philip Dorsett's not a great wide receiver, but as a wide receiver 3, I think it's a very solid option. If you're depending on him last year, there's a couple times where I know that the Patriots were really hurting at wide receiver. He's not going to be that stud go-to guy, but as number 3 option, I think that's very solid. Look at Russell Wilson. He's been using tight ends very effectively the last couple of years. He's been leaning on them heavily. Now they added Greg Olsen. Now he's 35, but Greg Olsen's got a solid year ahead of him, and they got Will Disley and some other tight ends there. So I like the weapons he has around them. In the last 3 years, you found this stat. He's averaging 4th among fantasy finishes, right? Mm-hmm. What's that stat you kind of broke down a little bit there?
Yeah, so over the last 3 years, he is on average finishing as the 4th best fantasy quarterback. I believe 1 year he finished 1st, 1 year was 3rd, and I believe 1 year was 9th, bit of an off year for him. But also that year, their offensive line was pretty horrible. They have since fixed their offensive line issues, and he's just been great. There's no arguing it.
Yeah, you said you gave that offensive line game up 51 sacks that year, according to your research there. He's everything that you want in a player. He's athletic, he's talented, he's intelligent, hardworking, he's got great character. Besides Pat Mahomes, He's the safest quarterback pick that carries the least amount of risk. In fact, he hasn't missed a game in 8 years. I love Russell Wilson. Don't get so caught up in that new and improved, the new guys coming in the league that you overlook a guy like Russell, who is a great quarterback out there.
I love that. Russell Wilson hasn't missed a game in 8 years. That's impressive at any position at all in any sport. And for a lot of guys, like we're going to talk about Carson Wentz soon, a lot of people stay away from Carson Wentz because, fantasy value is great, but it only matters when he's on the field. There's no concern with Russell Wilson on that. And I just thought that was a really interesting stat, like never been hurt. That, especially for a guy who had, 19 rushing touchdowns in his career is really impressive. But let's move on to our next guy. I think Carson might be next, actually.
He is, yeah. Let's get to him. So Carson Wentz, I know some of you might struggle with this pick here, but bear with us for a moment, okay? I think that we live in a society where we have very short memories. The grass is always green on the other side. We are a throwaway society. You get a brand new iPhone, you know what you can't wait? It's for the next iPhone to come out, right? And I think it's true when it comes to football. We always want the next best thing. But for every breakout quarterback like Lamar Jackson broke out last year, how many people got burned by Baker Mayfield and other young quarterbacks? And I think we forget so quickly what this guy's done. He's a former first-round pick, second overall. Okay, people forget this guy was really hyped for a while. In 2017, during his sophomore year, before he tore his ACL, he was hands down the front runner for MVP. It wasn't even close. He was just dominating. The Eagles had a 10-2 record. They were dominating. In his last 9 games before he got injured, he was second in the NFL with a 107 QB rating behind Watson. During that stretch, during that 9-game stretch there, he had 27 touchdown passes and only 5 picks. He was on pace for 48 touchdown passes there. And he was really like the stud in the talk of the NFL. Like everything was Carson Wentz, Carson Wentz. Everybody loved the guy, right? Now, if you look at 2 of the 4 years he's been in the league, he's had a quarterback rating over 100. In year 2, he had 33 touchdown passes in only 13 games. It's only in 13 games, so he's getting into the 40s with that, most likely at that statistical average that he was showing. But here's why I love this guy. I could get into year 2 and what he did and how he forgot and how he was on pace for MVP. But I think probably his best performance was last year. I think last year he had a gutsy performance, and we don't give him enough credit on what he did. It should remind us really how high this guy's ceiling is and how talented he is. He was very impressive last year, and I'll break that down. You have to consider what he had to deal with. Okay, they had a ton of injuries on offense. They were down to their 5th wide receiver. They were calling up practice squad players at some point. They had no weapons at wide receiver. Injuries to Jeffrey and some other guys left him, if you can remember last year, left him with Greg Ward being his #1 wide receiver. An undrafted practice squad player becomes his #1 go-to guy. Their best running back was a rookie who had a very good year, but he's still a rookie, right? And there's the growing pains of being a rookie. And yet that didn't slow him down at all. Last year he had 27 touchdown passes. That was 5th among quarterbacks. And he quietly finished 9th among quarterbacks in fantasy points. Did you know that? 9th and 5th. Once again, those are some really impressive numbers. And as the year went on, he actually got better and better. The more obstacles came his way, the better he got. Weeks 13 through 17, as the Eagles were making that push for the playoffs, he was great. 3 times he had over 300 passing yards during those 5 weeks. He accumulated 10 touchdown passes to only 1 interception. Now, we talked about surrounding cast. It's important there. I think he needs to develop some wide receivers. I think there's still a little hurting there. Will Jeffrey be back then? But he has hands down the best tight end combo in the league. It's not even close in my estimation. I don't know where you land with that, but I personally love their tight end combination. And we've been saying it for a couple of years, but Dallas Goedert, would be a top 5 tight end if he was on any other team. Right now, Zach Ertz really takes away his value. But that situation is becoming a lot, I'm almost afraid to say this, but those 2 guys remind me of Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski. Hopefully one of them's not a murderer. But anyways, those were 2 great tight ends, and I think it's very similar here. Either one of those guys can be amazing. Now you got to line them both up. What a nightmare for linebackers, right? Trying to pair that up. So he's got good weapons. He's got Ertz and Jeffries when he does make it back. Goddard. They drafted rookie wide receiver. I always mess up his name there.
Jalen Reagor or whatever. Yeah. It's one of those things. We don't know how to pronounce it, but we also don't care.
Rhaegar. We know we're going to say it wrong. We know we're going to get a lot of feedback from you guys. And he's got Miles Sanders, who had 50 catches last year as a rookie running back, and you found out that was 10th most all time by a running back.
By a rookie running back, 50 catches coming in 10th most. The guys above him are like Barkley, they're Christian McCaffrey. There's some really stud rookie running backs. To even be in that category is impressive. But on top of that, people forget he played banged up last year, and I actually think he missed a game. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because 10th best, 50 catches, that adds a lot to Carson Wentz's value to have that weapon in the backfield, a weapon that in previous years he didn't really have.
And then today, I read a report that there's rumors going around that Devontae Freeman wants to sign with Philadelphia, or he said, if I don't sign with them, I'm going to retire. If he does sign there, he's another back that's very good in passing situations. Devontae Freeman, he's not a guy that's really big and physical, but you get him out in space, he's very dangerous. Now, I think it's important to remember that Tom Brady, as good as he's been in his career, right? It took him until his 8th season, okay? His 8th season before he broke over 30 touchdown passes, and he was age 30 when he did that. Look at Carson Wentz, only 27 right now. Now, the question I think that might be on a few people's minds is, what about the fact they drafted quarterback Jalen Hurts? Is he their future quarterback? I don't believe so. Okay, I think what he's going to be is what I would call a specially packaged performer, very much like the Saints' Taysom Hill. Mm-hmm. I think you could see that there. Wentz will not be a backup. Even if Hurts does develop well, Hence will be starting somewhere else. Mark my word. They didn't bring him in, so I wouldn't worry about that at all. Plus, at least for 1 year, it takes a while for quarterbacks to develop. Like you look at Pat Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, it was year 2 for those guys. So I love Carson Wentz. I think he's very underrated. He's been in a lot of difficult circumstances. He's had to overcome injuries, and yet in spite of it all, still putting up very good numbers. When everything falls into place and he's healthy and that team is healthy, I think he's going to remind everybody why he was a first-round, second overall pick.
Yeah, well, the draft pick thing for me is really deceiving. Ultimately, they like to have a good backup quarterback. I mean, they saw what happened when they were able to win with Nick Foles. I think they realized just having some depth is important, and that really was that was the entire theme of this year's draft, because the Packers drafted a backup quarterback. They didn't need someone to replace Rodgers. They didn't. But also, that wasn't just at the quarterback position or at the Packers or the Eagles. It was everywhere. The Ravens set the record for the most team rushing yards by a team ever, and they drafted a running back in the 2nd round. It's crazy. I don't know what's going on with that, but a lot of teams, just like in this draft, felt like they needed to draft backups at positions. It's not a concern for me whatsoever.
All right. Well, let's get to our next guy. I think some of you are going to hate what I have to say, but bear with me. Lamar Jackson, right? League MVP, stud. Had a shockingly great season. So why is he not higher? You can't ignore those numbers, and his athleticism is off the charts. Watching him play, it looks like a picture game of flag football sometimes out there. It's crazy, men among boys. But for us here at FFP, okay, if you follow our videos, we've given metrics, we broke it down. We are not big on running quarterbacks. We're not. We're not saying there's not value there. We're not taking away from what he did last year. But one, we think their window is smaller. Injuries add up, and their track record is not good. If you look at it, if you're being very honest, I know you might love this guy, but put the emotions aside and get into some of the objective realities. If you look at it, track record is not good for running quarterbacks. Now, before you get on what I would call the Lamar Jackson, the running athletic quarterback hype train that goes along with all that, I want you to consider these things. How many athletic quarterbacks have come into the league that were supposed to really revolutionize the game? They had breakout years. They got hype, but defenses adjusted. They started taking hits. Injuries added up, and before you know it, that quarterback wasn't what we all thought he would be. Another thing that happens a lot, and I think we'll see it here too, is that teams get conservative. They're a franchise quarterback. All of a sudden, you don't see them taking those big hits, so they start to change a little bit, and the game evolves to the fact that they want them in the pocket, passing more and running less, which is their bread and butter. And then what happens is they begin to show deficiencies in their passing game. Now, this is not college. You can't just be a great athlete. You have to develop into a great quarterback. Now, the first thing to go, if you follow a trajectory of athletes when they get older, and what happens is that speed and athleticism are the first thing to go. And that's why pocket passers like a Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, who are not very athletic, right? Just watching those guys, watching them run, or you look at some of those things, they're not that impressive there. But they can have long, successful careers. Even though they may lose a step, lose some athleticism, it doesn't matter. Consider the fallout of players like Cam Newton. Has one great MVP season, but now injuries are adding up. And he's considerably bigger than Lamar Jackson. He's built more like a fullback. I think he comes in 250, 265, they say. Some say those are even low. He's actually even bigger than that. And I think Lamar Jackson weighs in 215, 220, so considerably smaller there. Think about Michael Vick or Robert, RG3 when he came in the league. I could go on and on of how many guys came in. We got hyped up, but then it just didn't translate long term. And here's the other thing. I'm not saying no one have a good year, but defenses will adjust. They will make adjustments. This is the NFL. It's funny because I think it was 2 years ago that there was that big game between the Rams and the Chiefs, and it was I found the score was 53-50 or whatever it was, and people said that's the way it's going to be. That's going to be normative in the NFL. But then last year, defenses really started to step back up, and all of a sudden, defenses were dominating again. Another concern. Go ahead.
Well, what I'm just going to say is the hype on Lamar Jackson is great, and I tell you what, if I were a coach If they said, hey, Christian, we need you for one game to put together a roster and to win a football game, I'd take Lamar number one. His athleticism, his talent, you got it. He's phenomenal. But we have to look over the next 3 years. And for me, the biggest concern is he doesn't have the same weapons as a Pat Mahomes or a Russell Wilson. I mean that. Marquez Brown is a fair wide receiver too, but as your wide receiver one, he hasn't developed enough for me to trust him there. And they do have Mark Andrews at tight end, but they also lost Hayden Hurst, who, by the way, was on the field for 35% of offensive snaps. That's a really big piece to your offense to lose. And so my question is and we've seen with every quarterback and every player in the NFL, you have a great season and teams adjust and your numbers regress a little bit. It happened with Pat Mahomes and Rodgers and Brady and Peyton. Every guy hit a peak and then they come down from that a little bit. You can't live in your peak forever. My question is, or my major concern is, when teams adjust to your play, how do you make up for that when you don't have great weapons as well? You know what I mean? That's my kind of two things that are the biggest contributing factors for this. Neither of them are necessarily a knock on Lamar himself, because I know a lot of people are probably pretty frustrated at us right now, and you've probably already left a comment telling us we're dumb, and maybe we are, but I have to think that those two things are legitimate concerns.
Yeah, we've had this before. We talked about some guys we got into that came in the league a couple years ago. We said about Cam Newton. We could go on and on, made these predictions, and people went off. But we'd say, you know what? Before you jump to conclusion there, pick a cup on your emotions, let's wait and see. And if we're wrong, we'll admit it. But yeah, I think time and time again, we've shown that we've been right in our estimation of this. Another thing that I'm concerned about with him is that he benefited greatly from red zone opportunities. Look at Baltimore. They led the NFL in red zone opportunities. 41% of their drives, 41% of their drives ended up in the red zone. That is crazy high to think about that. That's an extremely high mark just based on what I would call statistical probabilities and what I call an honest ceiling. Okay, mm-hmm. This is not Madden Red Zone or Xbox or whatever. What do young people use nowadays? I'm an old guy. It's not Xbox.
Yeah, you just really dated yourself Xbox? As super old.
What do they do now?
We play
Atari. Just kidding. Just kidding. But it's not a video game. Is what I'm saying is that that's not realistic. Those numbers are going to go down. Okay, if you look at his TD passes versus attempts, that efficiency was insane. That's going to have to come back down to earth a little bit there. Now, we called regression of Pat Mahomes after his big year. We were right. Same thing with Cam Newton. Same thing with Matt Ryan. And I won't get into all the details, Matt Ryan, all those guys. But every one, we came on, we predicted a recession, and they had that. So we expect that again.
Well, one last point, at least from me, I don't know what else you have to say, is they've got a great defense. Mm-hmm. They started the year with some defensive concerns. So they went out and added a second cornerback. And the second half of the year, their defense was, again, one of the best. And just what are you going to sit in there and think? You've got a good defense. You've got a good running game. John Harbaugh has been consistently in the NFL for many years a conservative coach. He's played less conservative now that Lamar's in, but you got to think they're going to play defense and run the ball like they have in the past, and that will always limit Lamar Jackson's value to some extent.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to say some very positive things with him in a second here, but bear with me. Once again, the reason why I'm building in all these concerns just to bring down the hype a little bit, not saying he's not a good player, but he was also very inconsistent last year. Yeah, consistency is important. Versus Miami, the Jets, Houston, and the Rams, during those 4 games, he had 19 touchdown passes. But the other 11 games, 7 times, he either had 0 or 1 touchdown pass, leaving 17 touchdowns in 11 games. That 11 games, you take that average out, that's about 25 touchdown passes per 16 games, which I think is a better representation of what you're going to get from this guy. Okay, I think he could throw for 25 easy. And you add his legs onto that and what he'll do on the ground. Yeah, very good quarterback there, but don't get caught up in what he did last year and expect that again. You look at Cam Newton. Goes out one season, has 35 touchdown passes, but the other seasons he's averaged 21.7 touchdown passes per 16 game. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see the similarities between the two there. Now, he did have 30 touchdown passes, but that flowed from play action. That's what defense. They led the NFL running. It wasn't just him. I mean, Ingram ran. They were running all over other teams, and that play action set everything up. Okay, it was set up by his legs. But once teams begin to figure out not to take that away, you're not going to eliminate that. But if you can begin to bring down some of that running a little bit, it's going to take away play action. He was not a tremendously accurate passer. Okay, and he wasn't very efficient in the pocket. Now his overall ranking by Pro Football Focus left him as the 5th quarterback, but that drops down to 23rd when he was throwing from a clean pocket. Mm-hmm. So you think a clean pocket, this guy would be beneficial, sit back there, not getting pressure, but he actually dropped quite a bit when he had to just sit back there, look down the field, make reads, so on. He struggled scanning the field and doing some of those things there. And the Titans exposed some deficiencies in his game. With that said, okay, I've said a bunch of negative things. I'm sorry. He's too young and he's too athletic to ignore. Okay, I know I've talked him down. That's not because I don't think he has value. He does have value. All we're simply saying is don't grab him as number 2 overall quarterback, okay, and don't grab him too early in the draft. Buyer beware. Don't overpay for the guy. Now, his legs did save him last year. I don't think he's going to become a great passer. He might only average, well, let's say 25 touchdown passes per season, with an additional 800 yards rushing, 79 rushing touchdowns, so for a season of 25 touchdown passes, 3,500 passing yards. I'm all twisted here on my tongue, forgive me. If you look at that, that still makes him a very great fantasy pick. So for me, when I look at where he's at, if I own Lamar Jackson right now, if I was you, for me, it's easy to stream quarterbacks. There's always guys that you can pick up out there. His trade value is monster high right now. So if I own him, what I would do is I would sell high. I would trade for a top wide receiver, maybe a top running back, get the most bang for my buck. I don't think he's a great, I don't know what I call a pocket passer, but he's by far the most athletic quarterback in the history of the NFL. What he did last year was unbelievable. And going back to what you said, you need good position players around him. I don't think he's got top echelon players, but I do think that Mark Andrews and Hollywood Brown give him quality wide receivers out there and a tight end, somebody that's going to help him quite a bit there. You can love the guy, you can get the guy, just don't reach for him. Trust us on that.
Well, that's exactly the thing. You know what? If I'm thinking this is a dynasty video, what are we going to do in a dynasty league? You got way more trade value out of this guy. When there are a lot of quarterbacks, you could go out there and you could plug and play every single week to be a starter for you. You can't really do that running backs. I'd love to take Lamar and just go out and get a running back. Because you can go, I mean, people are low on Carson Wentz right now. You could go out and grab a Carson Wentz or grab another quarterback who's going to be fine for you and upgrade another position. And kind of hate that you stole that from me. I was waiting to say that. But you got to go with the trade value, sell high, as they say.
So not this year, but last year, they've looked at the one fantasy player that was on the most rosters of owners that won their Super Bowl or won their fantasy championship, whatever you want to call it, right? The one player is on the most rosters? Pat Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, someone would argue, well, yeah, because he had 50 touchdown passes, but I don't think it's necessarily why. Yes, he had a great year, but his average draft position that year was 9th. That meant you got Pat Mahomes in the 9th round, but you also loaded up on other positions.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here. There's always going to be someone that's going to creep into that top 10, top 15 that you can use, but you got to have good backs to win in the league.
Plus, there's something weird to it. I don't know what it is. I'm pretty sure NFL quarterbacks take steroids for between their first and second year because every quarterback, Lamar kind of sucked his first year. Then he was insane. Pat Mahomes just was on the bench, and then he was insane. Carson Wentz had just 16 touchdown passes. To very next year, he was on pace for like 48 or whatever it was that you said earlier. Like, there's always going to be another quarterback to step up like that in their second or third year. So I would rather take a shot and try to find that next guy and get that, that ADP, get that value for my pick. But let's move on because I'm pretty sure we've been talking on this guy for 2 hours now.
Well, I know I just did because I know that no matter how much we put out there, people are going to hate that pick. But it doesn't matter anyways. Let's move on.
So now we got to talk about Deshaun Watson, another pick that I think some people are going to hate. The reason I think some people are going to hate this is I think that a lot of people think he is too high. I think a lot of people dynasty-wise would rank him lower than we have him ranked right now. The loss of DeAndre Hopkins is no doubt a major loss to Deshaun Watson's fantasy value, and that kind of sucks. But you do have to remember a few things. One, he has been absolutely dominant over the last few years. And even with the loss of a stud wide receiver, they did replace him with Brandon Cooks. And I think they've got some weapons there. It's not that they don't have talent. Years in the past, the issue was never talent. It was health for some of those wide receivers and players on that roster. But we also have to project not just 2020, but 2021 and 22. Over the next couple of years, what are things going to look like? And for me, Deshaun Watson still has huge fantasy value, and it goes kind of the opposite of Lamar. This is a buy low situation for me. I could pick him up and keep him for a very low value and not have to give up a whole lot to trade for him or anything like that. But over the last 2 years, he has finished 5th and 4th in fantasy points among quarterbacks. So he has been elite up there with some of these guys we've been talking about. And of course he's done that. He's had 14 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years. And he's actually combined for 70 touchdowns over the last 2 years. So you're getting basically 35 touchdowns a year. That's right up there with some of the other most talented guys on this list. He's also got the 3rd highest adjusted completion percentage last year among quarterbacks, among qualifying quarterbacks, I should state. So that's great to see. I think adjusted completion percentage is an awesome reminder of, hey, when your receiver doesn't drop the ball, you don't have anything kind of messed up go there. It's purely a measurement of how accurate your quarterback is. He is one of the most accurate quarterbacks. This guy's like Superman. He's been doing everything for that offense. And the fantasy value has been there. So yes, he's going to lose some value in DeAndre Hopkins, but I don't think he plummets to quarterback number 20 or 15. I still think he is a top 12 fantasy quarterback this year, but what I like is the future, right? What are they going to have a couple of years from now? What are things going to look like? He has been too elite in his performance and his dominance to just simply ignore it. Again, it's all about talent. What are things going to look like for them? They did go out there and add David Johnson. I do like that because, quite honestly, the Duke Johnson-Carlos Hyde combination they had last year was far from great. And I think that getting a running back like David Johnson in the passing game could be very beneficial to them. And while Brandon Cooks is no DeAndre Hopkins, looking at Brandon Cooks to go alongside Will Fuller, if both those guys are healthy, that's actually a good receiving core. And then don't forget, they have Darren Fells. He had 7 receiving touchdowns last year. That was 3rd best amongst tight ends. I'm not saying Darren Fells is Travis Kelce, but yeah, I definitely think he's a little bit of an underrated tight end that adds to that receiving core just a little bit. So yeah, he's coming in at this list, and I do think we go by tiers for keepers. I would put him not in the number 1 tier for me. Our last pick, Lamar, boom, all those guys on up, that's a tier 1 fantasy dynasty quarterbacks. He comes in at tier 2 right now, probably, at least in my book. I don't know about you. We haven't talked too much about tiers for this, but just simply because he doesn't have everything figured out right now, and Bill O'Brien kind of scares me a little bit, but he's been too dominant not to put here. How do you feel about that, Rob? Would you agree with that statement that he's just been too good?
Yeah, he's on the this guy. I love Deshaun Watson. Like to me, he's a human highlight reel. You talk about in the pocket, the ability to buy time. Obviously, he can go out and he can run and gain yards, but I don't know how many times I've seen him where it seems like this guy's going to get tackled, sacked, going down. Somehow, some way, he finds a way to find open space. I love watching this guy play. He's been unbelievable. I think he's very underrated. I love him up here. And once again, I certainly wouldn't have a problem in a dynasty video if somebody said tier 1. I do think he probably needs a little bit better weapons around him to secure that position.
Yeah.
I think it's a better argument to kind of drop him down to tier 2 for dynasty anyways, quarterbacks. But I love the guy.
But he's still good.
Yeah.
And it's the opposite of Lamar Jackson. You can buy low on this guy, and you don't have to give up a lot for him, so that is really nice. I know a lot of leagues are really strange in the way they work. People always say, should I keep this guy if it's going to cost me a first-round pick or whatever? I know some leagues make you give up draft picks to keep specific players. I imagine if you're in one of those leagues, you're not giving up a super early draft pick for Deshaun Watson, and that's always nice because that's becoming increasingly common. It seems like almost every comment I get about who should I keep involves that sort of, do I keep this guy for this pick or this guy for that pick? But let's move on with our next guy. I love Deshaun Watson. There's simply no arguing how insanely talented he is, and that's why he's got to go here on this list.
So look at the Cardinals there. So Cardinals have a brand new head coach. They got a rookie quarterback. And I think all things considered, right, I think they fared well. I wouldn't say it was a great year, but I think overall it was a decent year for both the coach and the quarterback. Look at Kyler Murray was taken first overall, and he accounted for 24 touchdowns last year. I would say that's solid for a rookie, not great, but definitely solid. He has everything skill-wise, okay, to be a stud. He really does. But he does play in a position that we've mentioned many times that there's a very sharp learning curve there for quarterbacks. Now, when you consider, though, look, for example, we talked about Pat Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, who year 2 had the breakout year. Now, we're not going to say he's going to go from year 1, year 2, and next year he's going to win the MVP. But I think he easily can become a top 15 quarterback. But when I look at him, here's the thing. His ceiling is much, much higher than almost every other quarterback in the league as far as first overall pick, his talent, and what he could do. So what's to love? Why do we think he's going to take that next step and evolve and get better and become a guy that week in and week out you could play and use and could put up good numbers? Well, I think every good quarterback needs, or it certainly helps if you can have a stud wide receiver. You need to have good weapons around you. Unfortunately, Larry Fitzgerald, who I love, by the way, he's old. He's getting old as far as a football player goes, and his best years are far behind him. But lo and behold, the Cardinals front office take advantage of Bill O'Brien in a trade that, in my estimation, was criminal. It's just, I don't. If I was a Texans fan, I would be very disappointed if I was you guys out there. Can you say DeAndre Hopkins? That's why I have a ton of confidence in Kyler Murray this year. DeAndre Hopkins changes everything for me. That is enough to spark what I would call a tremendous amount of optimism in what he's going to do. And then you add Larry Fitzgerald, who, yeah, he's older. As a number 1 guy, he's not going to cut it. But as a number 2 guy with good hands, I think he's great there. And then you add what I believe is an underrated Christian Kirk. I like him. And to me, those 3 guys are great weapons around there. I love those weapons. And then here's the thing. You add Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake has great hands. He's great out of the backfield catching the ball. In fact, a couple years ago, he led all backs in catch percentage. And he's dangerous out in space in the passing game. In fact, Drake finally did what we've been saying for years we thought he could do. We kept giving metrics. We're saying, man, these coaches are not giving him enough touches. And then they finally got a coach that's using him properly. and we saw what he could do there. Makes me think of back when Aaron Jones came in the league. Remember when Aaron Jones came in the league? Everybody was hyped up on Jamal Williams, and we said, no, it's not. Your guy to go with is Aaron Jones. Everybody hated us. Well, looking back, boom, there you go. You look at Kyler Murray had what I call a solid rookie campaign. Now he's ranking higher in this because this is a dynasty video. He's young and he's talented. He's a former first-round pick. But when I do my redraft rankings, he's going to definitely be lower, of course. But I do like the guy in dynasty.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The one thing you didn't mention that could definitely benefit him is that defense is kind of bad right now. In fact, they're going kind of doing a major overhaul this offseason to fix that defense. They really have one player on that defense that was performing. That was Chandler Jones, who actually had 19 sacks last year. Quietly had a really dominant year, but the rest of that defense was kind of a mess. That could certainly help his fantasy value over the next few years if they continue to have a bad defense like they had last year, which was a major issue for them.
Yeah, you look at how many quarterbacks out there. We're not talking about great quarterbacks. We're talking about efficiency, but half the battle is find a quarterback that, like you said, has a bad defense. You look at Jameis Winston. You look at another guy out there, Blake Bortles, a couple years ago had over 30 touchdown passes because they're always playing catch up. Garbage time stats, it doesn't matter. It all counts the same.
Yep. So now we got to talk about Daniel Jones, who could easily in a couple of years from now be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, especially fantasy-wise. He had a phenomenal rookie season, and a lot of people don't even believe that. I think a lot of people looking back like, oh, his rookie season was all right. He had some big games, but he had some bad games. But a lot of people don't realize his 24 passing touchdowns, which was more than Kyler Murray, by the way, not to necessarily compare the two too much, but that was the third most passing touchdowns by a rookie quarterback ever. What's most impressive about that is he had just 12 games starting, which means he was on pace for 32 touchdown passes as a rookie. He had some absolutely monster games. He had 245 fantasy points. That means he was on pace for 327 fantasy points and would have finished as the 6th fantasy quarterback last year. So yes, he had a very dominant game, or a very dominant season, and it came off the backs of some really dominant games in particular. We saw some really highs and some really low lows there from him. But the fact of the matter is, when you have 3 of your 12 games, so 25% of your games, you're going over 300 yards and having at least 4 touchdown passes, there's really no arguing. The ceiling for him is extremely high, and the ceiling is high because he's got good weapons. Darius Slayton last year was a pleasant surprise for any Giants fans to see. They had a really kind of a sneaky young stud wide receiver, and then they have Shepard, who without injuries, I think Sterling Shepard would be one of the best receivers in the NFL. It's one of those top 15, top 20 wideouts, but injuries have held him back. And you've got Ingram and Golden Tate and Barkley. Not the best receiving core in the NFL, but it's a deep core of weapons to throw the ball to, and that helps him out quite a bit. In fact, Slayton had 3 games with 2 touchdowns apiece. So yeah, big upside from some of those guys. But what I like most is they went out and drafted they were the first team to go out and take an offensive lineman in this draft. They draft Andrew Thomas with, I believe, the 5th overall pick, and that's going to be a huge boost to giving some extra blocking there on their offensive tackle position and just getting them some more time. That offensive line was bad last year, and just giving some help there. As obvious as it sounds, it's just going to stop defenses from being able to hit him. He's going to have more time to throw the ball. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward concept, but it could have huge ramifications. I remember just a few years back when the Colts took Quentin Nelson, and in just 1 year, their defense went from one of the worst towards one of the best. And now last year, the Colts had the 2nd best pass blocking offensive lines, or I believe run blocking offensive lines. But you can see just how big of an improvement that can make. And finally, ultimately, their defense is still quite a bit of a mess. I think he is a great situation right now, and if he develops off of last year, he could have a huge season next year, though we'll see kind of how things continue for him. But Daniel Jones is a guy, for me, high ceiling, really low floor. I'm not going to take him too highly, but I'd be fine waiting on him in a draft and just taking my shot on him, and worst thing that happens is he's a stream quarterback with huge upside.
Yeah, I like Daniel Jones. I like the situation he's in there. One of the biggest reasons why I love where he's at is Saquon Barkley. Got a little bit of man crush on Saquon Barkley there. He's going to keep defenses honest. That play action is going to become tremendous. Took a step back last year, but I think a lot of those defenses focused on him. They had troubles with the offensive line, you name it. If I'm a defensive coordinator and I'm facing the Giants last year with Daniel Jones starting, you know what I'm going to do? Load the box, try to shut down Saquon Barkley, obviously there. So I think he's got everything that he needs around him to be successful. So Dak Prescott, we're going to look at Dak Prescott. He had 30 touchdown passes last year. First time he's hit that number, but I think he's shown many times in the past that he has the makings to be a stud quarterback. A lot of people forget that back in 2016, he was Rookie of the Year
Mm-hmm.
that year. And right now, currently, he is 5th all-time in NFL history with his quarterback rating. 5th all-time. You know who he's tied with, anybody? You probably see my notes there, but he tied 5th all-time with Tom Brady.
It's a pretty good guy to be tied with in anything.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, he's still only 26 years old. Now, we talked about the maturing process for a quarterback is a lot slower than other positions. We talked about earlier how many quarterbacks don't really hit their stride till after the age of 30. I mean, he's got a lot of room to grow, and I like that about him where he's at. Now, some would say, well, back in season 2, he had a major drop-off that was disappointing, but that was really a tale of 2 seasons there. He started hot that year, actually, if you bring to break it down. In 2017, in the first 6 games, he had 13 touchdown passes, only 4 interceptions. He was actually on pace for 35 touchdown passes that year. Well, what changed? Well, here's what changed. Ezekiel Elliott was suspended. And that changed everything because the bread and butter of that offense was play action. Zeke's not there, play action's not there, then the offensive line was banged up, and I think there's a domino effect. They didn't have a lot of weapons, you name it, but that's changed. They're getting healthy. They brought some good weapons in there. And talking about good weapons, we've talked often today about how you need that. He's got Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup there, and some of his running backs that are above average in the passing game. And a nice bonus to his, like I said, I think he's a good quarterback, but he's got 21 rushing touchdowns in 4 seasons. In fact, the first 3 he had 6 each year, so he's a guy that's going to give you a nice bonus there as far as rushing touchdowns. And last year, as his game took that next step or that next level, he had 306 passing yards per game, just missing out on 5,000 for the year. And that trend is apparent. I think the year before when Amari Cooper arrived there and got traded there, that's when things begin to change. So that number I think is going to be consistent. You could easily see him staying 280 to 300 all the time. I like Dak Prescott. Whatever you think about the Dallas Cowboys, I'm not a Dallas Cowboy fan, but I do like Dak Prescott.
Well, the one piece that comes in that wasn't there last year, Mike McCarthy. That's interesting because he could be bad for the organization and still good for Dak Prescott. I think there's a lot of complaints the Packers had with he didn't develop the defense enough and he misused his running backs. None of that is going to affect Dak Prescott. None of that concern. The one thing Mike McCarthy is known for doing well is getting Aaron Rodgers some stats. So maybe he'll do the same thing for Dak Prescott. I certainly think that'll help him. Though, again, maybe it won't help the Cowboys organization as a whole. So let's talk about Josh Allen. I'm not the biggest fan of Josh Allen. I think some people are really huge on him. I'm not quite as big on him, but there is a lot to like about him in fantasy, especially right now. Not only did he make huge strides forward from his first year to his second year, he doubled his touchdowns and yet had 3 less interceptions, and his quarterback rating was better by over 18 points. So massive improvements there. Good for Josh Allen. That's nice to see that development. We'll see how that continues.
Yeah, I know you're limited on time, but you look at his quarterback rating that went up. You take away the games against the New England Patriots, where New England Patriots defense last year was amazing. Their pass defense was spectacular. That quarterback rating, I think, was up, probably 25, 26 points, honestly. But
Absolutely. But you tack on top of all of that, 17 rushing touchdowns in just his first 2 years. That's huge. Now, again, we're not big on mobile quarterbacks, and I don't expect him to continue having 8 or 9 rushing touchdowns every year. But you can tell this clearly his style. And as long as he's a starting quarterback in the NFL, you're going to get 2 or 4 at least. And that helps. 2 or 4 touchdowns in the running game at least is nice. Gets you a little bonus, gets you a little boost. That's going to help out if he misses a passing touchdown or 2 from week to week. So while I don't think that that's going to help keep him up there with the Pat Mahomes, Lamars, doesn't matter. This is still something that helps. But what I like most about him, plain and simple, he has the best receiver he's ever had in Stephon Diggs, and he's got the best receiving core he's ever had with all 3 of those guys. He's add Diggs. Last year he had, over the last 3 years, Diggs has had over 3,000 yards and 25 touchdowns, plus a quarterback rating of over 110. That's how good Diggs has been. In fact, he averaged over 5.1 yards after catch and had 18 yards per catch and finished 20th in fantasy points amongst wide receivers. Then he's got John Brown last year, went over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. He also, John Brown, by the way, which is the model of consistency and absolute safety blanket for Josh Allen, as he finished with these, from week to week, he had the second most amount of top 36 finishes behind only Michael Thomas. 11 times he was a top 36 fantasy wideout. That's a really nice, dependable mark, and with 72 catches, he's a reliable PPR wideout to help give him some options to throw the ball to, just for every down, safe kind of, again, just safety blanket, a reliable receiver. And then you add in number 3, Cole Beasley. Cole Beasley was 34th in fantasy points amongst wide receivers. He had over 775 yards and 6 TDs on over 65 catches. So ultimately, that is one of the best 3 receiving kind of trios or receiving trios in the NFL right now. It's really deep. There's a lot of great and dependable options, and that's what I like most about him. Is he's a guy who's been developing his talents and his maturity and his playing, but then boom, you give him the best receiver he's ever had. For me, there's no arguing it. This dual threat quarterback, he's got a solid fantasy future in the NFL.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe we're gonna talk about it a bit, maybe not. But Devin Singletary, another nice weapon there. He's a guy that runs a lot, like you said. He's actually a little bit bigger quarterback, so I think he can take some of that wear and tear. The one thing I will give credit, going back to Lamar Jackson too, though, is he's not as big as some of these guys we've mentioned. I do think Josh Allen can take some of those hits. He's a pretty big guy there. But Lamar Jackson's so elusive, sometimes it's hard to put that big hit on him.
Yeah.
But I'm not big on running quarterbacks, but it's hard to ignore this guy. The first year, I just thought, I kind of just can ignore that. But game after game after game, he's continued to really open up. But the biggest thing for me is I love how aggressive the Bills team were when they went after Stephon Diggs. And as a Vikings fan, that hurts a little bit. But he didn't want to be here, and there's nothing worse than keeping a player that doesn't want to be there. And I think they got themselves a nice pick with him.
All right, so the 10th and final guy that we have to talk about is Matt Ryan. Now, Matt Ryan at 35 years old seems a little bit too old to be on a Dynasty video, but I want to remind you all that Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, all of those guys have had their best years late into their career. You just talked about it earlier with Peyton having his 55 touchdown passes at 37 years old. And the reason Matt Ryan can still fit in this video is he's got great weapons, he's had great fantasy value, and he's still got 2-3 years left, right? He's still got a few solid years left, and it's just becoming common nowadays for NFL quarterbacks to last longer and longer. The rules have changed. Now you can't even sack a quarterback as hard as you used to. I mean, it's just what allowing these guys to last a little bit longer. And ultimately, the weapons are there, right? You got Julio Jones, you've got Calvin Ridley, and while you lose Austin Hooper, you gain Hayden Hurst. I think those are two somewhat comparable tight ends. I think Austin Hooper was quite honestly a little bit overrated last year. What you saw often with Hooper was that he's got great hands, but he wasn't doing a lot with it after the catch. He was a bit more of a safety blanket, and I think a lot of Hooper's numbers were on volume and not necessarily just how stud of a tight end he was. So I wouldn't think it's unrealistic to see Hayden Hurst come in and have similar, though slightly less numbers. But again, you've still got Calvin Ridley, one of the best young wide receivers in the NFL. He's got 127 catches, 17 TDs, and a quarterback or a generated pass rating when targeted of 120.8. In his first 2 years in the NFL, he has been a touchdown machine and a very reliable wide receiver. And heck, you want to talk about reliable? I say we just change Julio Jones' name to Old Reliable because this guy's been insane. He's got 8 seasons over 1,000 yards. That's just unbelievable. I don't know how you manage that level of just consistency. In fact, he has had 6 straight years with at least 1,394 yards. 6 straight years where he's practically getting you 1,400 yards. That's insane. So yeah, the weapons are there. And then of course they'll go out and they add Todd Gurley. What I like about adding Todd Gurley is Gurley has 165 catches, 1,500 yards, and 12 touchdowns just in the air over the last 3 years. Yes, there's some concerns about Todd Gurley's health, but if Todd Gurley can perform even a little bit, it's going to be in the passing game, and it's going to help Matt Ryan out because their running game and their offensive line blocking, their offensive line pass blocking has been fine. They've got a little bit issues run blocking, and their running game has been some concerns, and their defense has some concerns. But ultimately, this Falcons team has been just like a fantasy factory for Matt Ryan to put out huge games. Heck, he had 6 straight 300-yard passing games to start the season before getting hurt. He was on pace for just an absolutely phenomenal season. In my mind, there's really no arguing it. He is going to be, the next couple of years, one of the best fantasy options. The question is, just how many years is that going to be for? Probably only 2 or 3, though, like we said earlier in the video, don't waste your time projecting 6 years from now. Your fantasy roster, it doesn't even matter 6 years from now. If you're really good at fantasy, you'll find new talent and you replace guys as they retire. That's just the truth of it.
Yeah, we mentioned how important it is, how your defense. And so if you look at Matt Ryan, he's had some good years. He had 1 year there, though, he took a major fantasy regression. And it was tied specifically to the fact that the Atlanta defense made vast improvements. But then last year they regressed again back to a bad defense. I know they had injuries, but that defense is not good, barring any unforeseen things. I don't think they're going to be a great defense. And I think that bodes huge for Matt Ryan. So, yeah, I like him too. And, at 3 to 5 years, that's still a lot of years left to have this guy. So.
Well, I tell you what, if there are 3 things that make a good fantasy quarterback, it's good receivers, good offensive line, and a really crappy defense. So I guess he's got it, right? But That's our final pick, Matt Ryan. May not be the best pick, but again, buy low. You don't have to kind of give up too much for him. And the fact of the matter is he's going to have good fantasy years, just like he's had over the last couple of years. So I do like Matt Ryan at this pick, but let me know if you guys disagree with any of these picks. So we would love to hear your guys' picks. We'd love to hear how you agree and disagree with our thoughts. And make sure to complain that this video is almost an hour long. Can't believe we talked this much football and we're that boring doing it. But guys, we thank you so much for supporting us and keeping up with our channel. As always, hit that subscribe button and like this video if you really want to support us. We do appreciate your support. You guys really are the best. So you guys just have a great day and God bless.